Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. My name is James. After more than a year of struggling to mend what felt like a crumbling marriage, my wife, Clara, decided to put me on a 90-day trial. At the end of it, she'd decide whether we'd remain husband and wife. That moment was the final signal that our relationship was beyond repair. I made my first move after that, and Clara didn't take it well. Not at all. Let me walk you through how it all unfolded. Clara and I have been married for 7 years. For a long time, I genuinely believed she was the person I'd share my twilight years with. Our marriage didn't begin broken. In fact, the early days were full of light. We were a unit, moving in sync, making decisions together about everything. Our home, our future, even the small stuff like what to cook for dinner. Clara was kind, attentive, and noticed the little things that mattered to me. I cherished that about her. Growing up, my world was different. My parents' marriage fell apart when I was a kid, leaving behind a home filled with tense silences, raised voices, and emotional distance. That chaos left its mark. Long before I ever thought about love, I made a vow to myself. I'd never bring a child into a fractured home, and I'd never be the kind of man who abandons his family. That promise shaped the husband I became. When I married Clara, I poured everything into our life together. I wasn't just chasing love, I was building something solid, commitment, stability, the kind of foundation I never had as a kid. I worked hard, covering most of our expenses because I wanted Clara to feel secure, to know she could rely on me. I believed that if I showed up every day, if I kept giving my all, we could weather any storm. That belief carried me for years, maybe longer than it should have. But after our 6th anniversary, something shifted. Clara started changing. Not in big, dramatic ways at first, but in small, subtle ones that grew harder to ignore. She became obsessed with these self-help podcasts, the kind that framed relationships like contracts where one person, usually the woman, should always demand more while giving less. I'm all for personal growth, but what Clara was soaking up felt toxic. Our conversations started to feel like audits. She'd question my every move as if I had to justify my existence in her life. It was like I was constantly on trial, proving my worth just to stay in the game. The complaints started with household chores. She'd say I wasn't pulling my weight. I'll admit, I was tempted to push back, especially after grueling workdays that left me exhausted. But instead, I listened. Maybe she had a point. Maybe I could step up. So I did. I took on more, cleaning, cooking, whatever she pointed out. I wanted her to feel supported, loved. But no matter how much I did, it was never enough. My efforts seemed to vanish in a thin air. She'd go silent for days after every minor disagreement, creating an icy distance in our home. When we had guests, she'd slip in subtle digs at me, masking them as jokes. Compliments became pointless. Affection, a rare event, only happened on her terms. It didn't feel like love anymore. It felt like a prize I had to earn. Clara started going out more, too. At first, it was occasional, drinks with colleagues, a girls' night here and there. But it became a regular thing. She'd come home late, offering vague explanations, brushing off my questions with a wave of her hand. I didn't push. I still held on to the hope that this was just a rough patch, that we could fix it. I didn't want our home to turn into a war zone. One night, desperate to reconnect, I suggested renewing our vows. I thought if we could remember why we fell in love, we might find our way back. I even proposed couples therapy, explaining it could help us communicate without judgment. Clara's response cut deep. She laughed and said, "That sounds like too much effort." A few days later, she came to me with a folder, sitting down like we were at a business meeting. Instead of all this therapy nonsense, she said, "We're doing a 90-day trial. You'll need to prove yourself. At the end, I'll decide if we stay married." I was floored. Words failed me. Then she added, "I'll be sleeping in the spare room during this. Let's handle this like adults." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because in that moment something clicked. I'd been so afraid of losing her, of failing, that I'd let her keep raising the stakes, thinking I'd always chase. But she didn't see it. She'd already lost me. That night, I sat in silence, and for the first time in years, I felt clarity. The game she'd started was one I'd finish, but on my terms. The morning after Clara laid out her 90-day trial, I woke up with a strange sense of resolve. Her words had stung, but they also lit a fire under me. I was done pleading, done chasing someone who saw me as a problem to be fixed. That day, I made a call that changed everything. I booked a consultation with a divorce attorney named Rachel, whose name I'd found through a colleague's recommendation. Sitting in her office, I poured out the whole story: Clara's distance, the trial, the way our marriage had become a one-sided performance. Rachel listened carefully, her expression calm but focused. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, "James, don't confront her yet. Start documenting everything: texts, conversations, her behavior. Build your case quietly." Her advice was like a roadmap, and I followed it to the letter. I began keeping a detailed record. Every cold shoulder, every vague excuse about her late nights, every dismissive comment. I wrote it down. I screenshot messages where she brushed me off or made demands. It wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about seeing the truth in black and white. The more I documented, the clearer it became that Clara wasn't trying to save our marriage. She was setting me up to fail. Alongside this, I started digging into our finances. Rachel had warned me to get a clear picture of what was ours, what was mine, and what Clara might be hiding. I found a few unsettling things: small withdrawals from our joint account, charges for restaurants and hotels I'd never been to. I didn't jump to conclusions, but I filed it all away. Emotionally, I began to pull back. I stopped reaching for affection or trying to spark conversations that only led to dead ends. Clara's mood swings no longer dictated my day. Instead, I redirected that energy into myself. I let so much of who I was slip away in the haze of our marriage. So, I signed up for a gym near my office in Portland and started going 4 times a week. The first few sessions were brutal, but the ache in my muscles felt like progress. I bought a pair of hiking boots and started hitting trails on weekends, something I hadn't done since before we married. The fresh air, the quiet of the forest, it was like rediscovering a part of me I'd forgotten. I also reconnected with old hobbies. I dusted off my guitar, which had been sitting in the corner of our basement for years, and started playing again. The calluses on my fingers came back, and so did a sense of pride. I wasn't just surviving, I was rebuilding. At home, I kept things civil. I'd greet Clara politely, handle my share of chores, but I stopped begging for her attention. I wasn't cold, just detached. She noticed. I could see in the way she'd pause, studying me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "You seem different," she said one evening, her tone half curious, half accusing. I just shrugged and said, "Just keeping busy." I wasn't about to tip my hand. Clara, meanwhile, leaned harder into her routine. Her nights out grew more frequent, 2, sometimes 3 times a week. She'd come home smelling faintly of wine or perfume, offering flimsy excuses about work events or catching up with friends. I stopped asking for details, not because I didn't care, but because I was done playing the fool. Her confidence grew, though. She'd toss out lines like, "You're lucky I'm even giving this a chance, James." I'd nod, smile faintly, and say, "Sure thing." My calm unnerved her. She'd squint at me, searching for a reaction, but I gave her nothing. I was no longer the man scrambling to please her. About a month into the trial, I started building a quiet support system. I confided in my brother, Mark, who lived a few hours away in Seattle. He didn't sugarcoat things. "She's stringing you along, man," he said over a beer one weekend. "You deserve better than this." I also reconnected with an old friend, Sam, who'd been through a messy divorce himself. He shared his story, and it was like looking in a mirror. Same silences, same deflections, same slow erosion of trust. Their support grounded me, reminded me I wasn't alone. By the halfway mark of Clara's trial, I felt stronger, clearer. I wasn't just preparing for a divorce. I was preparing for a life without her. But I still didn't know the full extent of what she was hiding. One evening, I overheard her on the phone, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. She was in the spare room, door cracked, talking in hushed tones. I caught fragments, something about a weekend away and, "Don't worry, he doesn't suspect anything." My stomach turned, but I didn't confront her. Instead, I added it to my notes and called Rachel the next day. She suggested hiring a private investigator. If there's something going on, she said, you'll want proof. It'll matter in court. I hesitated, but only for a moment. The old me would have clung to hope, convinced myself it was nothing. But the new me? I was done with illusions. I hired the investigator, a guy named Tom, who was discreet and efficient. He promised to dig into Clara's work trips and late nights. As I waited for answers, I kept my routine steady: gym, hikes, guitar work. I was building a life that didn't revolve around her. But the clock was ticking. The trial was nearing its end, and I knew whatever Tom found would change everything. As the 90-day trial Clara imposed entered its final month, the air in our home felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. I'd stopped trying to win her approval, focusing instead on my own path: gym sessions, weekend hikes, and quiet evenings strumming my guitar. But beneath my calm exterior, I was bracing for what was coming. The private investigator, Tom, was working in the background, piecing together the truth about Clara's late nights and mysterious trips. I didn't know what he'd find, but I knew it would shift the ground beneath us. Clara, meanwhile, seemed to grow bolder. Her dismissiveness had evolved into a kind of smug certainty, as if she held all the cards. She'd drop comments like, "You're doing better, James, but let's see if it's enough," her tone dripping with condescension. I just nod, keeping my responses short. My silence unsettled her more than any argument could. She'd watch me, her eyes narrowing, trying to figure out why I wasn't chasing her anymore. I wasn't. I was done performing for someone who'd already checked out. Tom called me one evening, about 3 weeks before the trial's end. I was sitting in a coffee shop in Portland, away from the house, when his number flashed on my screen. "James," he said, his voice steady, "I've got something. Can we meet?" We arranged to meet the next day at a quiet diner on the edge of town. When I arrived, Tom slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, receipts, and a detailed report. Clara had been spending her work trips and late nights with someone else, a man named Greg, a co-worker she'd mentioned in passing over the years. The evidence was undeniable: hotel bookings, dinner reservations, even a weekend getaway to a cabin in the Cascades. The dates lined up with her absences, including the week-long conference she'd just returned from. Seeing it laid out hit me like a punch, but not the way I expected. I wasn't devastated. I was angry, but clear-headed. The 90-day trial wasn't about saving our marriage. It was a distraction, a way for Clara to buy time while she carried on with Greg. I thanked Tom and asked him to keep digging to solidify the timeline. "This is enough for now," he said, "but I can get more if you need it for court." I nodded. I'd need it. Back home, I kept my routine steady, betraying nothing. Clara was unpacking from her latest trip, humming to herself in the spare room. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her fold clothes with a casual ease that made my blood boil. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Rachel, my attorney, had been clear: stay calm, gather evidence, build the case. So I did. I added Tom's report to my growing file, along with more screenshots of Clara's vague texts and dismissive replies. I also double-checked our finances again, noticing more unexplained charges, small but frequent, tied to places I'd never been. It was all falling into place. I leaned harder into my support system. My brother, Mark, came down from Seattle for a weekend, and we spent it hiking in Forest Park. Over a campfire, I told him about Greg. His jaw tightened. "She's playing you, James. Get out clean and don't look back." Sam, my friend who'd been through a divorce, gave similar advice over the phone. "She's banking on you being too afraid to walk away," he said. "Show her she's wrong." Their words fueled me, but I wasn't acting out of spite. I was acting out of self-respect. At the gym, I pushed myself harder, channeling the anger into every lift, every mile on the treadmill. I started journaling, too. Not just evidence for the divorce, but my own thoughts, my plans for the future. It was like I was rediscovering who I was outside of Clara's shadow. I even signed up for a local music open mic, something I hadn't done since my 20s. Standing on that small stage, strumming my guitar, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The crowd's applause, small as it was, reminded me I was more than a failing marriage. Clara's behavior grew erratic as the trial's end loomed. One night, she tried to pick a fight, accusing me of checking out on her. "You're not even trying anymore," she snapped, her voice sharp with frustration. I looked at her, calm as ever, and said, "I'm doing exactly what you asked, Clara. I'm giving you space to decide." Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. She wasn't used to me holding my ground so quietly. She stormed off to the spare room, slamming the door. I didn't follow. With 2 weeks left, I met with Rachel again. I handed her Tom's folder and my own records. She flipped through them, her expression unreadable, then looked up. "This is strong, James. Her affair, the financial discrepancies, it paints a clear picture. We can file any time you're ready." I took a deep breath. "I want to wait until the trial ends," I said. "Let her think she's in control until the last second." Rachel nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "Smart. We'll be ready." That night, I sat in our living room, the house quiet except for the faint hum of Clara's music from the spare room. I felt a strange peace. The trial was her game, but I was rewriting the rules. I wasn't just preparing to leave. I was preparing to reclaim my life. But what would Clara do when the truth came out? Would she fight back or crumble under the weight of her own lies? The final week of Clara's 90-day trial crept up like a storm on the horizon. The house felt like a pressure cooker, each of us moving carefully, avoiding the other's orbit. I'd spent months rebuilding myself, gym sessions, hikes, guitar nights at the open mic, and gathering evidence with the help of Tom, the private investigator. His reports, paired with my own records of Clara's behavior and our finances, formed an airtight case. I wasn't just ready to walk away. I was ready to end this on my terms. Clara, oblivious to my preparations, carried on with her dismissive routine, her confidence bordering on arrogance. She thought she was holding all the cards, but the deck was about to flip. Tom's final report came in 3 days before the trial's end. He tracked Clara's movements to a hotel in downtown Portland, where she'd met Greg again. Photos showed them laughing in a dimly lit bar, her hand on his arm, his smile too familiar. There were also credit card receipts linking her to purchases I hadn't known about: lingerie, weekend spa trips, gifts that never made it home. The betrayal stung, but it also solidified my resolve. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about survival. I handed the new evidence to Rachel, my attorney, who nodded approvingly. "This is more than enough," she said. "When you're ready to file, she won't have much to stand on." I decided to wait until the last day of the trial. Clara had set the stage, and I wanted to deliver the final act. That morning, she emerged from a spare room, dressed sharply, her expression smug. "So," she said, sitting at the kitchen table with a coffee mug, "today's the day. I've been thinking about whether you've earned another chance." Her tone was patronizing, like she was a judge delivering a verdict. I let her talk, nodding as I sipped my own coffee. Inside, I was steady, my plan locked in place. She went on, listing my shortcomings: not attentive enough, not ambitious enough, not enough of whatever she decided mattered. I listened without interrupting, my face neutral. When she finished, she leaned back, crossing her arms. "I'm still deciding," she said, as if dangling our marriage like a prize. I stood up, walked to my study, and returned with a folder. Her eyes flicked to it, a trace of unease crossing her face. I set it on the table and slid it toward her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice sharper now. I looked her in the eyes, calm but unflinching. "I've played your game, Clara, but I'm done. These are divorce papers. They're signed and filed. This marriage is over." Her face froze, the smugness draining away. She opened the folder, her hands trembling slightly as she scanned the documents. For a moment, she said nothing, just stared at the pages as if they'd rewrite themselves. Then she looked up, her voice low. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "The trial's over. I'm choosing peace." Her shock turned to fury in an instant. "You think you could just walk away like this?" she snapped. "After everything I've put up with?" She launched into a tirade, accusing me of abandoning her, of failing as a husband. I didn't bite. I just stood there, letting her words bounce off me. "You're making a mistake," she said finally, her voice cold. "You'll regret this." I smiled faintly. "I'll take my chances," I said, and walked out of the kitchen. Clara didn't let it go. 2 days later, I was served with papers of her own, a counterclaim filled with accusations that hit like a slap. Emotional neglect, controlling behavior, even hints of verbal aggression during arguments. None of it was true, but it was calculated. She was trying to flip the narrative, paint me as the villain to strengthen her case. At first, I was stunned, then furious. But Rachel had prepared me for this. "She's desperate," she said during our next meeting. "This is what people do when they're backed into a corner. We got the evidence to counter it." I leaned on Tom again, asking him to double-check Clara's movements. He came back with more text messages between Clara and Greg, pulled from a cloud account she hadn't secured properly. They were damning, not just confirming the affair, but showing she'd been planning to leave long before the trial, discussing how to secure her future while keeping me in the dark. The betrayal was raw, but also gave me leverage. Rachel filed a response, attaching Tom's evidence and my meticulous records of Clara's behavior. "This changes the game," she said. "The court won't ignore this." At home, Clara's facade began to crack. She tried to bait me into arguments, but I stayed calm, refusing to give her ammunition. One night, she cornered me in the living room. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she hissed. "You'll see how this plays out." I looked at her, unbothered. "I already know how it ends," I said. Her eyes widened, but she had no comeback. For the first time, I saw doubt in her expression. As the divorce proceedings loomed, I kept building my life. I played another open mic, joined a hiking group, and started looking at apartments in Portland's quieter neighborhoods. I wasn't just preparing for a legal battle. I was preparing for freedom. But Clara wasn't done fighting, and I knew her next move would be her boldest yet. The divorce proceedings loomed like a storm finally breaking. Clara's counterclaim, packed with fabricated accusations, had set the stage for a messy battle, but I was ready. With Rachel, my attorney, and Tom's airtight evidence of Clara's affair and financial secrecy, I felt grounded, not vengeful. The 90-day trial Clara had forced on me was over, and so was my patience for her games. I'd spent months rebuilding myself, physically through the gym, emotionally through my music and hikes, and practically through meticulous preparation. Now it was time to face the fallout. Clara's demeanor at home had shifted since I handed her the divorce papers. Her smug confidence gave way to a mix of defiance and desperation. She'd alternate between icy silence and sharp jabs, try to provoke a reaction I refused to give. One evening, she stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, and said, "You'll be sorry when this is over, James." "I'll make sure of it." I just shrugged. "Do what you have to do," I said, and walked away. Her threats didn't faze me anymore. I knew the truth, and soon, the court would too. The first court date arrived a month later in a Portland courthouse. I sat beside Rachel, calm but focused, as Clara's lawyer spun a tale of me as a neglectful, controlling husband. It was surreal hearing her accusations laid out so formally, claims of emotional distance, financial manipulation, even a vague suggestion I'd been intimidating during arguments. Rachel leaned over and whispered, "They're reaching. We got this." When it was our turn, she presented our case with surgical precision. Tom's reports, the photos of Clara with Greg, the receipts, the text messages, my detailed logs of her behavior, and the financial records showing her secret spending. The judge's expression remained neutral, but I could tell the evidence landed hard. Clara's face tightened as Rachel spoke. Her lawyer tried to downplay the affair, framing it as a symptom of my alleged neglect, but the text told a different story. Clara plotting her exit while stringing me along with the trial. The judge asked pointed questions about the timeline, and Clara's lawyer stumbled, unable to refute the evidence. By the end of the session, the air had shifted. Clara's smugness was gone, replaced by a nervous fidgeting I hadn't seen before. Outside the courtroom, Clara approached me, her voice low. "You didn't have to do this, James. We could have worked it out." I looked at her, steady. "You made your choice long before I made mine." She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. She walked away, and I felt a weight lift. For the first time, I saw her not as my wife, but as someone I no longer needed to carry. The final hearing came 2 months later. The judge ruled on the division of assets, and Clara's hopes of walking away with the upper hand crumbled. The court saw through her accusations, and the evidence of her affair and financial deceit tipped the scales. She got less than she'd expected, far less than the secure future she'd bragged about to Greg in those texts. I kept our home in Portland, while she took a smaller share of our joint assets. Rachel had warned me divorce rarely feels like a victory, but as I left the courthouse, I felt free. Looking back, I see now I should have walked away sooner. It's easy to say in hindsight, but when you're in the thick of a marriage, you cling to hope, convinced things will turn around. That hope cost me years, drained my peace, and chipped away at who I was. I stayed because I was afraid of failing, of becoming another divorce statistic, of admitting I'd married someone who stopped choosing me. Clara knew that fear and pushed every boundary, testing how far I'd bend. But even the most patient man has a limit. Handing her those divorce papers was me choosing myself. I'm not going to pretend I have it all figured out now. I don't. I'm in a new apartment, still playing my guitar at open mics, still hiking on weekends. There's no grand plan, no new love waiting in the wings, just me, rebuilding. And that's enough. The uncertainty ahead feels lighter than the years I spent in a home that felt like a battlefield. Peace is worth more than I realized. If you're holding on to something that's draining you, ask yourself, is it giving you life or taking it? I wasn't honest with myself for too long, and when I finally was, everything changed. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have stayed longer, fought harder, or walked away sooner? I'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories. And if you're in a place that feels heavy, maybe it's time to ask what you're really holding on to.